Good evening, everyone, and thanks very much for coming. This is the latest in our discussion series of discussion meetings under the name Talking About Socialism from a Marxist Point of View. This is your first meeting tonight. You're very welcome. My name's Ed Potts. I'm going to be chairing the meeting. And the subject is what should communists and socialists be doing in the elections that are coming up. Now, there's a change to the programme tonight, as it were, because Chris Strafford, who was due to be introducing this discussion, has unfortunately been taken ill. So we send him our best wishes and hope he gets well soon. But Nick Wrack has very kindly stepped into the breach and is going to be introducing the discussion for about 15 minutes. And that's what we normally do. We have a 15-minute introduction, and then we have contributions from the floor of 3 minutes. It is a strict time limit, so I will cut you off after 3 minutes, but that's to make sure that everybody gets a chance to come in and share their thoughts and raise questions and points for discussion. And then once we've had contributions from everybody who wants to, then we can have time for another round as well. Quick couple of housekeeping things. These meetings are recorded and they're also live streamed to our Facebook and YouTube pages, so you can pick the recordings up there and share them afterwards with anyone who might be interested. But just be aware that what you say is being recorded and shared publicly as well. In terms of being called in to speak, it's massively helpful to me chairing if you can use the Zoom virtual hands. But if you don't know how to do that, then wave your physical hand and I'll do my best to keep a note of who's wanting to speak. So without further ado, I'll hand over to Nick to introduce the discussion.
Thanks, Comrade Ed. Welcome, comrades. Thanks for attending. So the question that's posed in the introduction to the meeting is, what should socialists and communists do in the general election? How should we approach it? What should we say? And I think in order to answer that question, we have to start with two different ends of the pole, so to speak. One is where we are now, and the other, and importantly, is what is our ultimate objective. In my opinion, it's almost impossible to determine what you should do as a socialist, as a communist, unless you know where you're trying to get to. So I just want to start off by reiterating one of the points that we make quite regularly in these discussions is that we use the term socialist and communist and socialism and communism as basically synonyms for the same thing. We don't see socialists as being different from communists. We don't see socialism as being different from communism. Socialism and communism is essentially, in our view, a form of society that supersedes capitalism. It comes after a period of working class majority rule when democracy is extended to all aspects of life, the capitalist class is expropriated, and we have a new society in which ownership of the means of production and the wealth of society is owned in common, and production carried out democratically in the interests of all. And we can aspire to Marx's aphorism, from each according to his ability or her ability, to each according to their need. So that's our objective. That's our ultimate goal, to use a phrase from Rosa Luxemburg. That's where we want to get to. I think it's important to state that because socialism is a term, a word with many different interpretations. Communism has its own problem because it's equated with Stalinism, which we seek to reclaim it for its original meaning. But socialism can mean every sort of thing. And in the majority of its uses in the modern era, it simply means a sort of left-wing liberalism. It's generally meant for a better way, if it's possible, of organizing or managing capitalism. And if you look at, the Labour Party claims to be a democratic socialist party. Even the left of the Labour Party, who call themselves socialists, I would quibble with that. I would call them social democrats. And even the social democrats of today are different than they were 30, 40, 50, 60 years ago, because in reality, none of them, I would argue, really posit or argue for a new form of society. They argue really to introduce a series of reforms, many of which it would be difficult to achieve, but they argue for a series of reforms within the capitalist system itself. And they don't really challenge or tackle the question of why the crises that we have, economic, social, political, constitutional, climate, why those problems arise, the question of war being perhaps one of the most prominent at the moment. Lots of people oppose war. Lots of people oppose climate change, but very few people link those to capitalism and the drive for profit, which both leads to the destruction of the environment and rivalry between nation states and the wars that we see. So what do socialists and communists do in the general election? How do we approach that? In my opinion, we have to say, well, what we're trying to do is to popularize communist ideas or popularize socialist ideas, whichever is your favored term for what I've tried to describe. What is the best way of making those ideas common currency, common coin amongst the working class? How do they become popular so that they become the common sense ideas of the working class? Because we also make this point, which is essential to our way of thinking. Socialism, the transformation of society that leads to socialism, can only come about by the mass action of the working class itself, acting in its own interests. It's not going to happen through a minority coup or insurrection. It's not going to come about through any charismatic leader acting on their own or even with a small group. It's got to be an act or series of actions that are carried out by the majority of people in society. That the working class is the majority of people in most countries in the world, and certainly on a global level, it's the majority class. And it's our job as communists to make conscious the power and strength and the ability of the working class to change things, and to explain that it's necessary, and it's necessary for the working class to act as a class to achieve that. So elections are part of the terrain into which communists have to intervene. Again, I don't know whether this next point is going to be controversial, but in my opinion, communists can never and will never attain the support of the majority of people in society unless they conduct themselves and intervene and participate in the democratic process that is established under bourgeois capitalism, under capitalist society. Parliamentary elections are taken seriously by workers. It's probably one of the few times in the 4 or 5 year cycle or whatever it might be in a particular country where political ideas are discussed daily with the question of what program are we going to back, what party are we going to follow. And the refusal to participate, refraining from participating in elections by communists, in my opinion, basically diminishes and weakens the opportunity of getting our ideas across. Now, at the moment, we are starting from a very low level of socialist communist ideology in society. We've been pushed back a long, long way. Part of the problem has been that we don't present our ideas. A lot of us have been involved in campaigns in the Labour Party, in other organisations, And one of the criticisms that could be made is that we've spent too much time arguing for somebody else's politics, arguing for somebody else's program. And by that, I'll take, for example, the experience of some of us, perhaps even most of us. When Corbyn was elected as the Labour Party leader, we joined the Labour Party to support the shift to the left and to intervene in the political debate that ensued. And I think that that was correct. But what we didn't do sufficiently, certainly from the point of view of those who are involved in talking about socialism, we didn't sufficiently critique, criticize, engage with what was the mild social democratic reformism of Corbyn, of Corbynism, of momentum, and so on. And we lost time, we lost opportunities. So coming back to the elections, before I just make some more general points, there are quite big events that have taken place in the last week that reflect the fact that there's something going on. In the 2 or 3 years since Starmer's taken over, he's shifted the Labour Party back very, very far to the right, almost indistinguishable from Sunak. He appears a very authoritarian leader, politically very few differences. Galloway, who's just achieved a success in Rochdale, has a favourite phrase of his, Sunak and Starmer, two cheeks of the same backside. And it resonates. But the question will be going through the heads of working class people up and down the country. What do we do? Most people will be wanting the Tories kicked out. 46% is the last percentage that I saw for Labour, which indicates that they're heading for a victory. The question of how big that victory will be is something people might want to comment on. But at the same time, there's a lot of discontent, discomfort, anger, because Starmer and the Labour leadership, and he's basically corralled all of the Labour benches behind him, even the so-called left, have been absolutely dreadful on the question of Gaza, on the question of Palestine, on the question of the mass murder that's taking place on a daily basis in Gaza, with over 30,000 people killed in the bombing and land campaign, the majority of them women and children, refusing to call for a ceasefire, now calling for a humanitarian ceasefire, which means that you allow a bit of time for people to clean up, tidy up, get maybe a sip of water before the bombing campaign starts again. And it's led to ructions in the Labour Party, with quite a number of councillors resigning. And of course, this is what's fueled and driven and been behind Galloway's, you might call it remarkable success yet again in Rotherham. What it shows is that people are dissatisfied with the Labour leadership, not just on Gaza, although that's the focal point in Rochdale. There will be attempts to emulate that elsewhere. I've just seen that Galloway is talking about standing against Angela Rayner. And so there are going to be candidates in the general election from the left, although I've got some, if I've got time, I'll come in a bit more on the question of George Galloway. I'll say this just in passing briefly. Galloway has got a strange, weird, eclectic programme of being very strident on the question of war, particularly on the question of Gaza, but elsewhere is very socially conservative. One of the leaflets that's done the rounds, if it's to be believed that it was his, he talks about, I believe in the family, I believe in Britain, I believe in law and order, I believe in small business, all of which could be taken out of the Margaret Thatcher playbook of the 1980s. So a strange, and of course, one of the slogans in Rochdale was the Trumpian "Make Rochdale Great Again." But what he doesn't do, he doesn't criticize capitalism. He doesn't pose an alternative to capitalism. And I've got only a couple of minutes left, so I'm just going to move very quickly onto the question of collective and Andrew Feinstein, which is a new development. And will pose questions tactically for communists. But given that I've got 1 minute left, I want to finish with these remarks. What should socialists and communists do in a general election? We need to find a way of presenting our own program. We need to use the intensification of discussion about political ideas, about political perspectives, and about political program to raise the idea of transforming society, of getting rid of the capitalist system, the exploitation of working class people for profit. And we need to pose the idea of a new society in which ordinary people, all people, can determine how the wealth of society is organized in the interests of all. That may mean, if possible, standing candidates under a communist banner. If not, we would obviously support people who were to the left and would pose some sort of left-wing campaign. But even there, it's important that we don't do so uncritically. We need to find allies. We need to find people who we can persuade of the arguments of communism. And that means being bold, being confident, being audacious, and presenting our ideas in a way that people can relate to, persuade them that their energies, their efforts, their time should be put together with others to build a new party, not a new Corbyn party, not a new social democratic reformist party, but a party that is based on the ideas of communism, of changing society and building that into a mass force within the working class. Thank you.
Thanks very much indeed, Nick. Now I'm going to start taking contributions from the floor. So anybody with something to add or a point to make or even a question, there's no there's no silly questions, there's no wrong points. They will all help us arrive at a greater understanding of the issues involved. So I'm going to take Dave Hill first and then continue taking people who raise their hands. So Dave, go ahead.
Okay, I've unmuted myself. Yeah, well, it's not easy, is it? I mean, a lot of us here have been trying to do this, well, in my case, for 62 years. So I'm supporting, I'm not here to push Tusk at all, but I've stood a number of times for Tusk. And just to get, this might be of interest to the comrades here. I've been very much involved in trying to get a left challenge to Peter Kyle in Hove and to all the neoliberal capitalist parties. First point I'll make is that I agree with every single word that Nick has said. I'm a revolutionary Marxist, I'm a communist, and I argue for that. In Brighton, we are trying to get we're in touch with about 12 different WhatsApp groups of all the left varieties, the campaigns, the social movements, Queers for Palestine, Extinction Rebellion, trade union groups, Trades Council, etc. And it's not easy. The question of the United Front comes into it, and I know that Nick and I agree that we do need Marxism, we do need communism, we do need the socialist stage before communism, and we need to persuade people to get there. Because if we don't, if we don't raise our flag and speak out these beliefs, try to convert, I use the word, people, then we vacate the battlefield. So come on, it's difficult. We have meetings in Brighton, some of them well attended, and it's a question of how far we go in allying, in putting forward, indeed, people who are not revolutionary communist or Marxist. It's a question of how far do we go because when we do stand, and as I say, I and many of perhaps people here, we get 1%, you know, if we're lucky. A lot of hard work, a lot of pounding doorsteps, etc. If in some cases up to 5%. And so there's a conundrum, and I'll finish on this conundrum because it's something that I and we here face every political meeting, every time we act politically. On the one hand, we want to change society. We want to persuade people to join us. But to use the electoral platform, then we do need to work with others, the people who I agree with Nick's criticisms, the people who are left social democrats. And so as Marxists, we need to look at the political context, the social context, the ideological context to decide where and when to adopt a united front approach. And I guess that Andrew Feinstein's approach will be left social democrats plus various assorted Marxists. So I haven't got any answers. It's difficult, and that's our problem. How and about the united front?
Thanks very much, Dave. Yeah, I mean, I think we'd all agree that developments are moving very quickly. Would the question have even been posed in the same way before Galloway's victory? Maybe people have thoughts on how they would relate to single issue candidates, people standing mainly or wholly on the issue of what's happening in Gaza, and of course, people with left-wing views, but people who wouldn't fairly be described as communists and with whom we have serious disagreements. How should we relate to them in terms of putting forward our ideas? I know that everybody will have their own opinions on that. So I can see Will has got his physical hand raised. Yeah, do you want to come in, Will?
Yeah, sure. First point I want to make is I use the word socialist, and the reason I would use the word socialist is because I don't want to hand over a whole history of political argumentation to the Social Democrats and abandon the word socialist. So I favour using it quite strongly. The history does funny things, doesn't it? And where we find ourselves is in a situation where, and I don't think this should all be about Galloway, by the way, this discussion, because there's a lot more going on than George Galloway, okay? What's happened is that international relations have once again struck at the heart of the British establishment. Imperialism and the role of imperialism has struck at the heart of the British establishment. Yeah, they are in a bit of a panic about it. Now, it just so happens that one of the individual top of part of that in Rochdale is George Galloway, but he is representative of one part, one stream of resistance to what's going on in Palestine. The Feinstein candidature against Starmer, which I frankly had written off, I'll be frank, I think has been energized by events in Palestine. And I think what we will see is the layer of Corbynites, who many of whom I suspect voted for Starmer, actually, who feel absolutely shafted by being persuaded to vote for Starmer in the leadership campaign, and the others who weren't, are going to re-emerge as a social and political movement of some breadth, is my view. I don't think it's an accident that Galloway said he's going to go for the deputy leader of the Labour Party. And so we might be in a situation where there are many different streams of opposition to Starmerism rising up, right, in a really complicated way, representing lots of different tendencies in Corbynism. As Galloway represents his own tendency, right? And frankly, if the leaflet which I've seen is true, it is like 1980s Thatcherism, there's no doubt about it. And actually mirrored maybe in some ways by what's going on with the French right, who are very anti-war. Yeah, the French right, very, very anti-war. You'll have French right leading anti-war demos, ripping up EU banners, ripping up NATO banners and holding up the French flag. Yeah. So there are going to be many streams in this oppositional movement. our job, I think, and what we should be doing is to support an electoral challenge, but support an electoral challenge on a principled socialist basis that calls for a transformation of society, explaining, I think as Nick said at the start, capitalism is at the forefront of two existential crises for the world in which we live. One is an environmental one, and the second one is a march to a global inter-imperialist war. And it is the job of socialists to point this out, and to point out that the only way we're actually going to stop these two twin existential crises is by getting rid of capitalism. And that's what we need to do.
That's great. Thanks very much, Will. I just want to throw something else into the mix for people to think about. Of course, we've been through quite recently an experience where people with whom we have some things in common, but other quite sharp disagreements, namely the Corbynite Social Democrats, came under a huge attack from the country's ruling class. And of course, we are seeing the media and the ruling class gearing up for a huge attack prompted by Galloway's victory and prompted by the majority support among the population for a ceasefire in Palestine, a ceasefire at least. Now, I suppose the question I want to pose to the meeting is how we resist those attacks, ruling class attacks, without getting too close to people who we have disagreements with and without allowing those disagreements and our own independent politics to be submerged. Do people agree that that's a risk? If so, how do we avoid that? What's the correct approach? So I'd like people to think about that. In terms of contributions from the floor, I'm not seeing any hands up at the minute. Janet put something quite interesting in the chat, which I think would be great if she were to expand on, if Janet's still in the meeting. Maybe that she's not. Oh, yes. Yeah, there you are, Janet. Sorry, I couldn't see your name for a moment. Are you able to just tell us what's been going on in the Starmer's constituency?
No, I'm not. I only know that really on the not the Andrew Marr show. Somebody mentioned Collective, is it called Collective? And Feinstein, and the guy that kind of, what's he called? I can't remember his name now. Anyway, he was one of the candidates. He said that, that's all. And then I did
and
actually...
when you say that, I'll just read out your message, Janet. Yeah. So OCISA, the what are they called? Organised Corbyn-inspired Socialist Alliance, is that what they stand for? Say Feinstein hadn't heard of Collective and had nothing to do with them. So somebody from OCISA is saying that.
Yeah, and I did try then to search if he had said anything about them ever. And he hadn't. I mean, he hadn't on Twitter. And knowing Andrew Feinstein a little, I would be very surprised if he was. He's joined, hasn't he, that other thing, the with Naomi Winborn Idrissi, for the many, I think. The kind of enough is enough. Not the kind of not trade union version of enough is enough. But so I think he's running on his own position, and it's quite personal in a way, although he's very political. He lives in Starmer's constituency. He's a Jewish anti-Zionist, etc., etc. So I don't think he's going to join any larger group. And I think, you know, he needs support. I mean, he's not, yeah, he's a Corbynite, I suppose. I don't know. But if I lived in Camden, I know who I'd be campaigning for.
Thanks very much, Janet. I think it's very clear, isn't it, that lots of different individuals and tendencies are preparing their own vehicle in order to do broadly similar things, but who runs the show might be a deciding question in a lot of them. I'm going to call in Greg and then Minnie. Go ahead, Greg.
Hi, thanks very much, everyone, and thanks, Nick, for your intro at the beginning and everyone else's contributions. I wanted to comment on OCISA and Andrew Feinstein. if he hasn't heard of Caesar before, I don't think he's alone. I haven't heard of Caesar particularly well myself, and I'm sure that probably very few people in that constituency have heard of them either. I do notice that Caesar are claiming him as one of their own on their website. What I would say about it is it's I mean, it's perhaps a a turn of fate that he's in Starmer's constituency, but also I feel like it's slightly unfortunate. I've got a deal of respect for the man and his politics, and obviously the background that he comes to the conversation with. But it does feel an awful lot like it's bread and circuses, really, isn't it? It's is he gonna genuinely invite a conversation about Starmerism? Is it just a continuity Corbynism platform that he's standing on? It's hard to say at this moment in time, obviously, but I would imagine that it's going to be really much of a soft Corbynism, if Corbynism probably could get any softer. Likewise with Galloway, I think it's unfortunate. I share no sympathies with the man like Toby, but I mean, in a fight between him and Angela Rayner, I would probably vote Angela Rayner. I think probably quite a lot of my socialist comrades might vote Angela Rayner in that instance as well. Living in Scotland as well, it's hard to see how any of this conversation really translates to this side of the border. We've got a particular sort of political crisis here, I suppose, that the SNP has collapsed as well as the sort of left of the Labour Party. So there's this gaping wide hole that at the minute no one's really talking about, even within the sort of political columns. So what happens from this point forward in these 40 odd constituencies remains to be seen. It might be a mixture of SNP and Labour MPs returned, but yeah, I imagine the turnout's going to be very, very low, I suspect, in Scotland anyway.
Thanks very much, Greg. I've got Minnie next, but keep those hands coming up and I'll call you in to speak. Go ahead, Minnie.
Thanks, Ed, and thanks to Nick for the talk and standing in there. Yeah, I think socialists and communists, as socialists and communists, we need to smash the Overton window. For example, this evening on Sky News, the Overton window was, on the Politics Hub, are we going to have tax cuts or are we going to have spending cuts? Absolutely ridiculous. There was nothing on the agenda about abolishing the rich, production by and for the people, associated producers all working together for the benefit of all internationally. I've heard that it's all about money and money in the capitalist system. And the Labour Party now, the price has gone up, £750 for a fundraising dinner with a left-wing MP, Dan Carden in Liverpool, £750. I think that leaves out the working class. The one thing I will say about Galloway coming to prominence again is it's delicious. It was delicious seeing him demolish the media the other night. I found that delicious. The way he said, respect Sunak, respect Sunak. I despise the man. I mean, that was wonderful. We have the terms Workers' Party and collective entering the language that's on the mainstream. I just words at the moment. I don't know really much about what's behind them. What should the left do in an election? Well, we need a platform. We need to discuss what is our politics. Well, we know what our politics is, but is there going to be a transition to socialism and communism? What will that transition be? What are our main immediate aims? I would say one of the main ones obviously would be production by and for the people, common ownership, obviously. Climate change, how can we sort that without like Will said, without abolishing capitalism. Yes, we need to get some kind of leaflet out there, even advertising this discussion group, something. But you'd need to have a program there, and the left is so split. But on Gaza's a huge issue. We see how the ruling class treats Gaza, the way that they're not even blinking at what they're calling the flower wars, is it, where people are being shot trying to get food. We have our own Hunger Games here. People are queuing at food banks. People are dying of hunger. We've seen people die in austerity cuts. We're all Palestinians, and that's what we need to link up and think about. So I think we do need to get some kind of a platform, and we do need to support alternative candidates, obviously. And I do hear what Ed says. Obviously, we just want to get our points across and not be sniping, really. We need to get our points across and start moving on with our ideas and ideology, Marxist ideology. Thank you.
That's great. Thanks very much, Minnie. Soraya.
Thanks. I think for me the question is, has the by-election result in Rochdale changed things? It seems to me that it is a reflection of the huge anger at the massacre of innocents in Gaza, and the fact that the Labour Party is has been so silent, really, in its position, and until very, very recently, and that gave the not the sole basis, because of course there's everything that people in Rochdale are facing, that the working class are facing throughout the country, but that was really a spark that led to the result. And does that mean that there will be further revolts in the general elections? I don't know the answer to that, because it may be that people are just keen on getting the Tories out. It may be that that's just not enough. Will Corbyn stand as an independent? I think that is an important point, because much as my view is that he squandered and really betrayed the massive influx into the party of a whole new generation, young generation of people who wanted to join the party because they believed that there would be something radically different. And of course, that didn't happen. That if he were to stand, I still think that would be an enormous pole of attraction, notwithstanding what he's done, or rather not done, in the past. So I'm not suggesting we all sit here and guess, but it's just, these are matters that as socialists, and not just, we want to be active participants in what's happening, because we want to persuade people that actually the only way forward is getting rid of the capitalist system. But they are quite important developments. And what will happen with Feinstein? Because he's got credentials, important credentials from the past. Again, a possible pole of attraction. And what we do in that position, I think that the Sunak declaration after the by-election result was really quite astonishing, that you had the Prime Minister coming out and on his doorstep, really condemning. It was an astonishing attack on the democratic election process. Other people will know history better than me, but has this happened before? I mean, basically, you don't like the results, so you come and say this is a disaster. And it's quite something. We may indeed often there'll be occasions when we comment in that way, but for the Prime Minister to come out It's a real, they are trying to, and I'll finish on this, they are undermining democracy, the government, cutting the rights to protests, the conditions, and so forth. And this is a further step in that process. And we've got to be very much aware of this. And if it's necessary, it may not be necessary, but to me, it seems to be necessary to spell that out. And
thanks very much, Soraya. I'm gonna cut you off there. Thanks very much for that. Tom, go ahead.
Thanks. Yeah, I agree with a lot of what's been said. Strikes me that if there is, and I hope I'm wrong with this, if there is some sort of grouping that does stand, it will be social democratic in the sense that Nick was saying at the start. I don't think it will be a socialist grouping. It will have socialists in it, but yeah, I don't think it will be. And even if communists like ourselves intervene, it won't be. I don't think it will be a genuine sort of socialist new party. But I don't think it's probably enough time or the organizational capability to build a new party as such before the election anyway. I think it will be, I mean, I heard Galloway talking about an alliance. We know that there will be potential independents standing. And I think that judging by what some comrades have said about the no ceasefire, no vote conference that happened in London at the weekend went like, it seems like a sort of just loose network or alliance will happen again. But in a way, that's kind of good, in my opinion. I came to left through Corbynism, and I think it would be bad if I sort of learn about the problems with the left unity attempt over the last couple of years, and I think it'd be bad to sort of have a repeat of that, where a lot of socialists get together and decide that they shouldn't form a socialist party, but should form a social democratic party. So right now, what we should do, and I think I'm just re-saying what a number of people have said this evening already, but is obviously participate as much as possible in these formations, but like really maintain a Marxist analysis and not shy away from those arguments. Yeah, and then hopefully once this election's out of the way, we can get off the hamster wheel for a minute and actually think a little bit more long term strategically about what would need to be done.
Thanks very much, Tom. So I'm not seeing any hands up, so I'm going to share myself in for a few minutes. And what I want to talk about is, I suppose, a different point of view to what I think Tom has just expressed, because I've come to the view over the past few years, or the past sort of 5 to 10 years, really, that there's always some kind of impulse and some kind of pressing event or circumstance which encourages communists not to put forward their own ideas and their own platform, but instead to support other people with other politics. And I think that the current situation in Gaza is obviously the really crucial thing going on at the minute, and I think it would be wrong to miss it, that is the really crucial fault line, and the wedge that can be driven into that fault line it is really leaving the establishment in both the Tory and the Labour parties really vulnerable in many respects. But what I and a group of comrades in Manchester have been doing is putting together an intervention into the upcoming election called Communist Future. And that's going to stand at least one candidate in the general election in Manchester Central constituency. And the thinking behind that is that What we really need to get into the habit of and relearn how to do as communists is how to state our ideas boldly and openly, and openly contest the ideas that are accepted as common currency in society, and to show that communism is a real force which can compete with all of the various ruling class tendencies and ideologies. So that's the project that we're pursuing. Obviously, everyone will be in different situations where they live. In some places, people will have independent candidates or pro-Gaza candidates or whatever form that might take. In others, there may be new left-wing formations emerging, and clearly people will have to think about how to relate to that. But I think I come from the perspective that we are very, very far back, as Nick quite rightly said at the start, in the sense that communists are quite a small minority in society. And so we need to think creatively about how to break out of that isolation and to relearn and re-establish ourselves as a force, not simply something that tail ends whatever tendency is dominant within the working class movement and within the left, but instead sets out our own ideas in an independent way. So that's what I wanted to raise. So I will go back to taking contributions now. Not seeing any hands up at the moment. Oh, yeah, sorry, Dave, go ahead. No, you're on mute, Dave.
There's so much happening up and down the country. And we know that various organisations are going to stand. Tusk is going to put up 100 candidates. It looks like the one in Hove will not be Tusk because they don't want to be burdened with that name. Let's not get into the pluses and minuses of Tusk and the Socialist Party, etc., bureaucratic centralism, etc. So they will have a big challenge. There's also so many other parties, the Social Justice Party. I was at the Tusk National Conference in February 14th. There were 12 different groups represented, including the massive group called the Campaign for a Mass Workers' Party, which, as I said earlier, there are 6 of us. Okay, but some of the groups had more membership. So up and down the country, there's going to be hundreds of pro-Gaza, anti-austerity, in some cases communist, Marxist, socialist. Usually they will be Corbynite candidates standing. I think what I devote my time to in my city is to try and bring these groups together. But it is so difficult, not underestimating it. And we've all faced these difficulties, like the main candidate who wants to stand in Hove. She's no working class experience, no working class background. All she talks about is Gaza and the sexual minorities. And it's going to be very difficult for me and other communist socialist comrades to actually get out and vote for her. So I think we do have to consider in each constituency, there will be a general election challenge from someone or other. We do have to consider, are we going to support even right-wing social democrats who are to the left of Starmer? The general tendency seems to be that anybody who calls themselves a Corbynite, which means a fairly modest version of left social democracy, the current opinion on the left seems to be we'll support anyone who does that. A meeting that I should have gone to on Saturday, but I went to see my granddaughter instead, was a meeting of about 100 councillors, the one that Andrew Feinstein was at and announced the collective. And there was lots of ex-Labour councillors. So there's going to be lots of ex-Labour councillors, people expelled, be fighting various seats. I think what we have to do, and it's this is my final long sentence. It's a bit contradictory, but it's to try and bring the left of Labour people together. But that has the difficulty of us getting out and supporting people. Yeah, they're Corbynite, but my God, that's not saying all that much. On the other hand, within those fora, we put forward our communist and Marxist ideas. So I've got no solutions, but I think we should try and bring the left together and advance our ideas. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Dave. So there's a few comrades who haven't spoken yet, although the chat's been pretty active. But Gary, Bob, Andreas, just calling out names who I think probably haven't spoken yet. If you've got anything to say, if you have an idea of how this is going to pan out locally for you, if you have a take on which candidates, what sort of candidates should be given critical support, if any, it would be interesting to hear your views on that. And of course, Steve as well. You might have a slightly different perspective on it. Always keen to hear different ideas. So if anyone's got anything to add, by all means, chime in. Oh, Barry, yeah, go ahead. You're on mute, Barry. Shall I unmute you? Hang on.
Yeah.
There you go. We can hear you now, Barry.
Can you hear me?
We can.
Yeah. Okay. I think I agree that we should, our wedge into the current political context should be a focus on the catastrophic threat to the climate and also the threat of a global imperialist war. I don't think our focus should be on Galloway, because there's a danger that you just repeat or echo the media obsession with Galloway and the attacks on Galloway. I mean, Galloway is a right-wing shit, but he's not a total shit. He's raised the issue of Gaza, and a lot of people support him simply for that. And we do need to make a connection with those people. And he's also demolished media personalities, which a lot of people like. And again, they're the kind of people that we need to make some kind of connection with. I agree that obviously we should use Parliament elections as a tactic to engage with people and not stand on the sidelines and abstain from parliamentary activities. But again, there's a danger that you will just promote Parliament and simply underscore illusions in Parliament. So I think it's very important to stress that we don't stand for parliamentary democracy, that we stand for workers' democracy. And I think that means stressing not bourgeois democracy, but the elements of workers' democracy within bourgeois society. I think Trotsky made this point in his book on fascism, the threat of fascism, and he said something to the effect of, well, we don't defend Parliament. What we defend is the elements of workers' democracy within Parliament. So, for example, trade unions, trade union headquarters, meeting places for workers, and the rest of it. On the phrase common ownership, I think we should always add control, the word control. A lot of people associate common ownership with state ownership, and I think it's important that we're in favour of grassroots control, socialism from below. And I think, you know, that's a point we need to make about self-emancipation of the working class. Will Corbyn stand? Well, he's always been a political power, to be very harsh. He's always feared engaging in debate and discussion and controversy. He's always ducked the propaganda when it's been aimed at him. And he's shown no sign of standing as an independent candidate. You would have expected him to make all the right noises for some time now, to stand forward and say, support me, I'm going to stand as an independent candidate. Some people might have expected him to stand for a new Workers' Party as a kind of totem, the kind of head of the party, which would, of course, be interesting in terms of attracting a lot of people to a party. But I don't think there's absolutely no possibility of that. On that astonishing statement by Richie Sunak, that absurd. I thought he was going to stand forward and declare that Britain had gone to war with somebody, you know, because they've always used that way of doing things as a way of introducing some kind of major political thing. In fact, it turned out to be a pathetic kind of attempt to create a moral panic over the Gaza protest. They're so weak politically over Gaza that he's got to come out like this and kind of turn reality on its head, saying the threat to democracy was the Gaza protest. So the democratic right to protest is somehow a threat to democracy. On the point about critical support to candidates, I mean, as somebody said, there's some kind of void on the left. It's difficult to know where the candidates that could encourage critical support, where are they? I mean, comrades here will know better than me, but you know, I can't see many left-wing candidates that we can support. On the point about left unity and initiatives like the Socialist Alliance, you know, I think that was a mistake to stand, as the Socialist Alliance did, on a social democratic program. I mean, that meant that the organisation, was substituting for social democrats and social democracy, which again is absurd, really, when most of the people involved were revolutionists of one kind or another. So I think we should stand on our, if we were in a position to do that, we should stand as Marxists, as communists, or as socialists, whatever label you prefer, but we should stand on our program and not pretend to be social democrats, which has always been a bit misleading and dishonest.
Thanks very much, Barry. That was excellent. I'm going to put out a sort of last call, if you like. There's still plenty of time for anybody to come in with one last contribution or any questions arising out of the discussion. Where there's a couple of comrades who haven't spoken, and if you'd like to, please do. And then after that, I'll call Nick in to respond to some points raised and sum up. So is there anyone who wants to come in at this point, even if only briefly? Will, I'll take you in a moment. Steve, so what I'll do is I'll take Steve and anybody else who puts up their hand in the next moment or so. So I'll take Steve, Janet, and then Will.
Yeah, just a couple of generalizations really, rather than the sort of statement of perhaps a different position, because it's fascinating to listen to comrades this evening on this and different perspectives and stuff. But I think we have to take the Galloway result into some context. It was a 40% turnout, and he polled 40% of the 40%. So you could make an argument. I'm not saying it's not, and it is important. It is very important, but there was lots of quite decent articles in the papers interviewing local residents that were saying they didn't deserve this election. And I think before we get perhaps naturally carried away that, you know, communities are standing up to Starmer, communities are, you know, the Gaza, there's a general horror about that. You see that in America with those. I thought that was very significant, you know, in the what they call them, the primary for Biden, and I think the poll 20% of people writing on there that they oppose the war in Gaza. But I think we have to sort of say, we have to put some of this into context. And obviously Nick himself has stood in the past on an independent ticket. And I think we just have to put, I think, and even from my point of view as a Labour Party member and holding perhaps that perspective, I think we just have to put a qualification around all this debate as to, I mean, even, I've never met the comrade before, but even Dave Hill, you know, some valiant work down there in sunny Brighton, but it's like pulling people together to really achieve what? And I think it's an important conversation, an important discussion. But we could be talking about a few hundred votes for a sort of more bolder program. And I think we just need to put it into a little bit of context that it's all part of a wider struggle, the trade union struggle and that environmental struggle, a struggle for our ideas. Some of these meetings are putting forward some excellent ideas that we're, you know, campaigning for generally. And I think perhaps we just need to, you know, if you look at Lenin's attitude to the elections, it was like, you know, an opportunity once every 5 years to vote for your favourite bourgeois. We just need to coax it. Is how important is it as an election? How important is electoral politics to a class struggle, to the saving of the environment and everything? So it is a fascinating discussion, and I hope people gain what they need to gain out of their own individual choices. I think it's a real testimony to this group that even amongst yourselves, perhaps, there's various different angles and everything. So it's a testimony to this group, and they are enjoyable and comradely discussions. I just think we need to put the election in its place, and I think probably there will be not necessarily a pro-Labour victory, but there will be a sort of anti-Tory mood and a workable majority for Starmer. And I think that raises then questions in the unions, and then perhaps from my perspective is possible activity within the Labour Party again. But that's a different discussion for a different day. But a good
Thanks
discussion.
very much,
Thank you.
Lou.
Yes.
Brilliant. So Janet and then Soraya.
Yeah, thanks. I think I agree more with what Dave was saying, which I guess is a kind of more pragmatic position. But I think what I'd say about, I also agree that, you know, communists, socialists, whatever, should be putting up candidates on the programme that we would support. But I think taking it pragmatically, looking at somewhere like Brighton and Hove, I can't remember, someone like Kyle needs to be exposed. And that would seem to me a priority. He is extremely destructive. I mean, all kinds of things. But I think there are some reasonably high-profile Labour candidates who really need to have a challenge. And if it's not, you know, a pure communist challenge or whatever, it needs to be the most effective person who can at least get those messages across. Maybe make him lose, maybe win. I doubt in many cases an independent candidate, not a Labour or Tory one, would win. But I think what I wanted to say was about Palestine and Gaza. It seems to me people, I'm not sure, but one or two people may have suggested, you know, it's the issue of the moment, and it's understandable that many people who are not even on the left are outraged about what's happening, because we're seeing, you know, genocide in plain sight every day. But I think it's become a much wider, I mean, that's the most important thing to me, actually, watching what's happening, but a wider debate about colonialism, about the role of the US, about the implications for the Middle East, etc., etc. So it isn't something that can't be part of a, you know, wider political strategy, because I think more and more people who we wouldn't see as being particularly informed or natural allies are beginning to see why this is happening and why it's not stopping. And so it seems to me it's not just the issue of the moment, it's the most critical one, and one that we, you know, need to educate, if that sounds so patronizing, but to explain the issues behind it. And it's not just Netanyahu, obviously, it's not just a fascist Israeli government. It's much wider than that. So I wouldn't dismiss it as something that is very important now, but it might dissipate before an election. It's something that needs to be at the forefront. And to be fair to Ganaway and the campaign, and when you watch him on Moats TV and so on, he is, you know, whatever else he is, he's extremely knowledgeable and committed to those arguments around what's been happening in the Middle East for the last, 40, 50 years. That's it.
Very much, Janet. So I'm going to take Soraya and then Will, and then we're going to finish up and go back to Nick. So Soraya.
I wholeheartedly agree with what Janet has just said, and I think it's just going back to what what Steve said. I don't think as a socialist, I want to discuss what's happening so I can try and understand what's happening and be able to intervene. I believe that we need to change society. We need to get rid of capitalism. But I don't think it's enough to say, well, we understand that we're not going to have a revolution through Parliament and elections don't really matter. I think that it's an understanding of the processes, and it's important to intervene because it is an opportunity to put forward a programme, to put forward demands that, in fact, same old politicians, same old programmes, non-programmes, things don't change. So I think it's important from that point of view. And I also think we can't, well, certainly I can't ignore the fact that the consciousness of the working class has been has been thrown back because of the depths to which the labour movement leaders have sunk by and large, and the idea that there is an alternative to capitalism, that you just have to try and make do. It's not even reformism as I say we, my age, where it seems that the social democrat, the reformists of the past were revolutionaries in comparison to the people today, because they at least were. Sorry, I'm not saying that's the solution to change society, and we know that it isn't. But I think all of this means we can't ignore where we are in the historical moment, and we work with what we have, and we can't. I'm not suggesting Steve was saying this, but we certainly, I don't think we can sit back and not consider what's happening, what it means, if anything, what's going on, and how we can intervene best for ourselves and our class.
It's very much, Soraya. I'm just going to take very briefly Minnie, who's got a hand up. So brief contribution, if that's all right, Minnie.
Yeah,
and then I'll come back to Will.
Yeah, I think that the working class, all of us, are really being wised up so quickly now from the exploitation of capitalism. People can't pay the mortgages. Fuel bills have gone up. They've skyrocketed. People can't keep warm. They're seeing what's going on in Gaza. They're seeing what the Labour Party's doing. The time is ripe for communist socialist ideas. I really like Ed's communist future thing, and I hope there's something online. I'm going to have a look at it. Ed, is there anything online? Thank you.
Yeah, I've posted a link in the chat, Minnie. Thanks very much. Will.
Yeah, I agree with quite a lot of what Janet said, actually. You tread the line between bourgeois politics, business as usual, and overestimating the possibility of for the left and for socialist ideas in the left. Because I think I certainly have been through a couple of decades where I was in and around organizations, well, one in particular that thought that the revolution was around the corner, and it wasn't. So, I hesitate to say certain things these days, but I think there is a systemic crisis. I don't think there's any doubt about it. And I'm actually pretty sure that Sunak's speech, I think, as Barry said, was a product of weakness, of fear, of the argument that Galloway had put and its impact, because the majority are calling for a ceasefire in the Gaza Strip. And I think what we've had is, if we remember, between the Iraq War and the emergence of Corbynism, there was 10 years or so. Yeah. What we're seeing now is a very compressed version of that. And also there's a whole generation of people who were students during the Iraq War, and they're now in their late 20s, early 30s, who have been through that process. And I think as the rest of the population has had an education in ultra fast time in historical terms about what the Labour Party means, what war means. And I do think there is an element of crisis in the ruling classes. And I mean, for example, if you look at Ukraine and what's happened in Ukraine, it is not going to plan. It's definitely not going to plan. And the latest I'm hearing from various discussion areas is that then the next cunning plan they're coming up with is putting NATO troops into Ukraine, but on the border of Belarus, to stop Belarus becoming involved and to release Ukrainian troops to fight the Russians. This is being canvassed, right? Which shows you that they are seriously concerned on two fronts. And on the domestic front, it is clear. Now, there will be a mass left campaign in the general election because Tusk will stand. There'll be lots of other leftists standing. Not sure what to make of Galloway and his program, but it does come down to program. And I think that we have to take a view based on program, what people are standing on, or whether we support them or not. But I also think, yeah, we do, as kind of socialists and communists, have to put a program forward. Yeah. And we do have to stand where we think it's possible to stand. And we do have to start arguing for socialism based on expropriation and a different kind of society. Now, you can put a communist label on that if you want, or a socialist label on it. But we have to think, I think we have to put those arguments forward in the stream, this surging, stream of people who are looking for an alternative. I think we're obliged to do it.
Much, Will, and thanks to everybody for that discussion. Took in so much there. I think Nick's got a bit of an impossible task here in trying to respond to things, but I'm sure he'll do his best. So, Nick.
Yes, thanks, Ed. Thanks very much, comrades. I thought really excellent points. And actually what it shows is this is a discussion that we've just got to keep coming back to, keep coming back to. And that is because, as a number of comrades have made the point, socialist ideas, communist ideas, as we are using the terms, have been thrown a long way back. And the question of our strategic objectives has been lowered. And therefore, the question of tactics, how we utilize aspects of capitalist democracy, maybe disappeared off the table of discussions. And we need to go back and in a sense, relearn a lot of the examples of the past. So the first thing I want to say is, our small group, we are in favor of unifying Marxists, whatever party they're in, whether they're independent or in one of the existing revolutionary socialist groups. We're in favor of the creation of a united socialist party or a united communist party, in which there would be disagreements and debate and discussion. We think it's mad that, given how weak Marxist ideas are in society, that we have Marxists split up into different organizations. That's something that we're going to have to keep coming back to and keep raising with other groups, why they allow that to continue. But at the moment, we have to accept that there's very little impact that we can have on the development of events at the moment with our limited forces. And therefore, we're sort of trying to read the room in terms of what's going on. And it is interesting that there are a number of different forces emerging. I mean, Tusk has been around for a long time. They're looking to stand over 98 candidates so that they get a parliamentary broadcast. Galloway has said that the Workers' Party of Britain, which is his party, is going to stand 50 candidates. And the Andrew Feinstein collective project is clearly, it seems to me, at least from what I've read, going to be supporting independent candidates. So the first question that's going to arise is, well, what's the program that they're all standing on? It does seem to me to be very, very similar in most cases, perhaps with a little bit more emphasis on socialism from some of the candidates in Tusk, maybe. And the question is it going to lead to the creation of a new party? Whether that, well, it's not going to be a communist party if it does, but it would be a step forward, in my opinion, if a left-wing social democratic party were formed that sought to challenge Starmer's Labour Party. Well, I don't have time to go into the possibilities of that at the moment. Looking at the weekend, Andrew Feinstein is clearly a very credible candidate with a very good track record, ANC activist, ANC MP in South Africa, resigned over failures to investigate corruption. He's written on corruption and the arms trade. Very, very credible candidate to challenge Starmer. But the question then arises, well, what's the program? Now, at the moment, the program that's collective, or no ceasefire, no vote, they seem to have basically just adopted the 5 demands from the Corbyn project, which is run by the directors are Pamela Fitzpatrick, an expelled Labour Party member, and Jeremy Corbyn. And those 5 demands are essentially very mild social democratic reformism, if you can call them that. They're elements of liberalism, really. I'm going to read them out just so that you can see. So first of all, the demand of the Feinstein collective, no ceasefire, no vote, begins with no ceasefire, no vote. And then the 5 demands from the Corbyn project, which they're adopting: real pay rise for all. So, yeah, Green New Deal, housing for the many, tax the rich to save the NHS, welcome refugees, and a world without war. Well, my own response to that is they're all worthy demands, but actually, unless you explain how the world works on the basis of class exploitation, on the basis of capitalism and how capitalism works, unless you argue for an alternative system, then those demands simply remain pious platitudes. And we've got to engage in the debate and the discussion to explain, if you want any of those or all of those, you have to fight for a change in the system. You have to change for a systemic break with capitalism. And to do that, you need a lever, you need a tool, you need a vehicle. And from our point of view, what that means is you need a party with a clear program for that revolutionary fundamental break with capitalism. In the question of elections, if communists do not stand in elections, they are not going to win or even begin to win significant support. Of course, we argue inside the trade unions, the workplaces, on the estates. But if we fail or refuse to put forward our program in elections, we are not trying to present our program properly. And we can't refrain from standing, because when we do in the first instances, we might get a few votes or limited votes or not very many votes. That's where we start. That's how we start. And we begin to persuade people, and we've got to be consistent, and we've got to do it again and again and again. And I take all the points that Barry made. We've got to use the platform in the elections to expose the limited nature of bourgeois democracy. Coming back to themes that we've discussed it in previous meetings, which are key and central for us. The question of a party and the question of a program. One of the problems that I see with Tusk, which has been at it for quite some time, and for the other initiatives that are in a tentative, putative form with lots of independence. I mean, even within Tusk, it's some Socialist Party members and others who are independents. The question would be, if you elected a councillor, say, or you elected, wishful thinking, an MP, to whom is that person accountable? What programme are they committed to, and how do we keep them on the straight and narrow? I'll just refer briefly to George Galloway. Most of what I would have said has been said. He is accountable to no one. He's accountable to himself, and that's it. And I know that from having worked with him in Respect. He will do what he wants without discussion with anybody else. That is not the sort of representative that I think that the working class needs or deserves. We have to have a party where we can call on our people to do what we tell them and not to do things that they want to do against the wishes of people in the party. But any step that groups or individuals take towards creating an organized structure on the left, we can support or encourage, but we have to criticize, and we have to constantly say that's not enough. If you want to achieve what you're saying you want to achieve, then you have to go further and adopt a communist or socialist program and call for a break with capitalism and argue for that. And there is no point, it seems to me, if we've got limited forces, if we've got very few people, no money, and limited opportunities, it would be a terrible mistake to waste our time and effort in building support for other people's programs. We need to maximize support for our programs, build areas where we've got support. And that's why I'm very encouraged and welcome the initiative that the comrades in Manchester have taken. And it's something that we're going to have to come back to. And with that, I see my time is up.
Well, thanks very much, Nick. I'm sure all of us share those thanks for a great introduction and really informed the discussion. In terms of what is coming up in talking about socialism, just briefly before we close, these meetings are every 2 weeks. And so the next one will be 18th of March. Currently, what we've got planned for it, we may talk about the timetable for it, but the meeting that we've currently got planned for the 18th of March is, in a sense, a development of this discussion under the heading Forging Socialist or Communist Unity, why socialists and communists should fight for their own politics. So taking into account developments, proposing new formations and new parties. Nick is going to outline the politics behind the statement that's been agreed by some of the people involved in organising, talking about socialism, who we are and the ideas that guide us. You can find that on our website as always, and talk about that statement and argue that building a party that stands for a complete break with capitalism is the only way to advance the interests of the working class. Beyond that, 1st of April, I'm going to be introducing a discussion on the crisis of local government and what communists should say about that. And then 2 weeks after that, on the 15th of April, will be introducing a session on the environmental crisis and what a socialist way out of it would look like. So with that, thanks very much to you all for coming and have a good evening.